There we go, speak of you. So thank you to everybody that's made it on tonight, and especially Claire Noyelle, who is here to speak to us tonight. I don't know how we connected, Claire, because I saw somebody post in a group about anxiety. Somebody said,
yes,
is there anybody that deals specifically with anxiety? And at the time, my husband was having his spinal surgery and was out of action. I was like juggling so much, and I just had a look down at what everybody said, and your name came up, and I reached out, I think dropped you a message, and we had a chat, and I came away feeling so empowered and amazed at how you talked about anxiety, and sort of not as a horrible bad thing to be feared, but actually something that we can understand. And I just said, oh my God, when I knew we were putting this 30-day group together, I just said, right, I want Claire to talk about this, because I know that some of the people on the call, I know that so many of my clients, my friends, overwhelm, anxiety, depression, all these things, it's so like prevalent now in modern day life, especially for us busy women and mums juggling so much. There's so much to carry and so many plates to spin that it's very easy to get that I can't cope, that sort of anxious feeling. And I would just love you to please just take over, tell us about you and how you got involved, and your background and what you do now, and just show people, or have a chat. And then guys, please ask questions, in the chat box. Definitely. As it comes up, ask the questions. We can do a Q&A at the end. We can ask Claire, ask Claire anything, because she's got a huge amount of experience. So
lovely. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for giving up your precious Thursday to join me. My name's Claire, as Chloe said, and by background, I'm a pharmacist. I've been a pharmacist for 28 years now, but I retrained in hypnotherapy about 5-6 years ago. Mostly out of curiosity, if I'm honest. I didn't really see it becoming a full-time profession, but the more that I started working on my portfolio of case studies, and the more success I was seeing with my clients, who weren't, I wasn't charging, it was just seeing them for free, but the more benefit I could see them getting, the more I thought, I really want to be doing this, because the very things that pharmacy fails to deal with, so as Chloe said, things like insomnia, anxiety in particular, depression, feeling overwhelmed and stressed, the things that pharmaceuticals really don't work particularly well on, even more severe things like OCD and some fairly heavy duty mental health problems are all worked really well with using hypnotherapy. There are lots of different versions of hypnotherapy. So you may, one or more of you may have had hypnotherapy. The particular version that I do is something called solution-focused hypnotherapy. The clue is in the name. It focuses more on finding solutions to the issues that you're facing than being regressive and going back and looking at how you got to where you are, which was what appealed to me. Because one of the loveliest analogies that my friend has come up with is that if you went to hospital and you'd fallen out of a tree and broken your leg, the hospital don't spend hours asking you what park you were in, what tree you fell out of, what branch were you on. They just put your leg in a cast, give you crutches so that you can get going and look after yourself while it heals. They get to the problem and they fix it for you. I know there's always been a discrepancy in how we see mental health and physical health, but I think if we start to treat mental health in the same way by looking after ourselves preventatively, as all of you are doing, then that will pay off. So if it's okay, I'm going to take over the screen and draw some really very non-artistic pictures, okay? So bear with me, and I will explain it to you as I explained it to Chloe. So there are lots and lots of different parts to your brain. Anyone that's done any degree kind of neuroscience or looked at this hasn't found this. But very simply, if we think about our brain, excuse my drawings, we have this bit at the top, and we have something at the front, which is called your prefrontal cortex. That is a little bit that I've just drawn as a square, and it sits just above your nose and your eyebrows, so in the middle here. Now, your prefrontal cortex is essentially what makes you, you. It's what makes you all individuals compared to all of us on the call, and very much what makes us as people different from animals. They don't really have such a strong part of the brain like this. And when everything is going well, your prefrontal cortex is attached to the rest of this bit here. This is the rest of your cortex, the bit that we'd see if we took the top of your head off effectively, that grey wrinkly bit that we're all used to thinking of as your brain. That's called the cortex. And that holds our memories, our experiences, the things that we learnt, the things that we take into account when we're working. And if these two parts are connected and talking and communicating really well, we are so good at making decisions. We use all that information to come up with a rational assessment of what's going on and to find a creative solution to fix it and to work with it. So when we're using this part of our brain, we're really smart. We're also really positive, and this is us at our best. Okay, so then there are other parts. These parts are much, much smaller, and they sit much further back and deeper in your head towards the back. They are the original primitive parts of your brain. And this bit in the middle, you may have come across as your fight or flight center. It's called your amygdala. And it's the one of the primitive parts of our brain. It's connected to these two other parts. The bit there is your hippocampus, and your other one here is your hypothalamus. I know they're really long names. Everything has such a long name. But these have fairly important jobs. Your hippocampus is responsible for processing memories and emotions, and it also holds patterns of behavior. So those can be good things like learning to tie your shoelaces that you can do without thinking, driving for most of us, but it might also be chewing your nails, checking the window locks half a dozen times, smoking or drinking. So those habits live. The bit at the back, your hypothalamus, is your brain's chemistry center. So some of the chemicals from there will go out into the body and around. So far, so good. Please do share. You weren't expecting a biology lesson, but stick with it. So these bits act together. Now, I've said to you before, they're the primitive parts of our brain. So if we've got this amazing evolved bit, why do we need this primitive bit? Excuse me. Well, the way I describe it is for emergencies. So imagine that as you were going out shopping or going to the car or going to get the kids, whatever, that you opened your front door and you stepped outside, walked down the garden, and there was a really large, really hungry looking polar bear. What would happen? Many things would happen. But the first thing that would happen before you even processed it is that I know your heart rate would go up. It would start beating really, really fast. Your breathing would also go up because your amygdala has noticed that there is something big and scary, and it's asked your hypothalamus to respond. So that starts chucking out adrenaline and cortisol, which is what puts your blood pressure up and makes your heart beat really fast, makes you breathe really quickly. It makes your palms all sweaty. It makes your stomach drop and have that horrible sick feeling. But all those things are designed to allow you to respond really quickly, to get away, to get somewhere safe. So that might mean that you would be able to outrun the bear. It might mean that you'd be able to climb a higher than average wall. It might mean, if you're particularly feisty, that you would find a stick and beat it up. But whatever you did, you then got somewhere safe. Great. But I also know at that point that you wouldn't just forget about it and move on. That part of your brain would still be going, where's it gone? Did it go that way? Has it brought its friends? What else is happening? Is it still there? And that is the job of this primitive part of your brain. It's to keep you safe from danger. Unlike the top part, which is really positive and really hopeful, this part is really negative. And it has to be. Because if we were to roll through life thinking polar bears were friendly, fluffy creatures that would be fun to play with, we wouldn't last very long. So it has to assume that worst case scenario. It's also really obsessive. If there was a polar bear in the garden, you are going to keep checking and making sure where it's gone. Where is it now? Where is it? That overthinking, that replaying, that reimagining where it's gone is very familiar to somebody who's struggling with anxiety and overwhelm, because that's what this part of your brain does. You can think of anxiety as bringing your brain's almost superpower. It's looking for danger everywhere in an attempt to keep you safe. If you've seen a polar bear once, you make damn sure you don't see it again. And if you think you might see it out the corner of your eye or at the corner of your window or running down the road, you would need to get ready for that. Does that make sense? This is your just in case emergency setting, and anxiety is a really potent part of that. This part of your brain was designed, if you like, back when we were cavemen, when everything was a real physical danger. So being on red alert, having your levels of anxiety high, made sense. We had to stay safe. But this part of your brain does different things too. If anxiety is not necessarily the best way, it might be that actually staying indoors is the best answer. That if there are polar bears out there, we don't leave the house. We stay indoors, we pull the rugs up, we don't go out. That's very much been reimagined as modern day symptoms of depression. You can see that desire to stay safe, to stay in a space where you feel comfortable, the only space that you may feel comfortable. The other option that your primitive brain has is to fight off any danger. So being angry, that hair-triggered temper that some of us have, where we just scream with entire fury, that's also from your primitive brain. So those three options, anger, anxiety, and depression, are very primitive, they're very basic. And how we respond is linked to kind of our experiences and our family background and so on. But they are all driven by a need to stay safe. So that's all well and good if we're talking about polar bears. But, you know, even in Denmark, I don't think there's any in Denmark, but there aren't any polar bears where we all live. So what is it that us to go from that intellectual part of our brain down to that very primitive part of our brain? And I talk about that as us having a stress bucket in our brain. So we have our stress bucket in the brain, and into our stress bucket goes all the negative things that have happened. So they may be the really big things: divorce, bereavement, even childbirth can be stressful for women. So these could be really big things that have gone in our bucket. There might be small things like running out of loo roll, losing the car keys, not finding the permission slip of the lunch boxes. Okay, so all those things can go in there, large or small. The additional problem we have here is that our brain, in its bony little box, is not good at all at distinguishing what's really happening from what's us imagining what might happen. So as we look ahead and worry about things that are coming up, am I going to make that job interview? Are we going to get through COVID? How are we going to get our money back from our holiday? All those things you can look ahead and worry about. Your brain thinks they're really happening. So it adds those to your stress bucket too. Then we can look back at things that have already happened. Silly things like, did I put kisses on that work email? Should I have left the car there? Do I know that person? There's all sorts of things that we look back on and regret and overthink and imagine again that your brain adds to your bucket. Then there's all the stuff that's actually happening now, the overwhelm that Chloe was talking about, keeping those plates spinning. And as mums, sexist as it sounds, and there's no guys listening, so I can say this, we take on everyone else's stuff and we put that in our bucket as well. And the more that goes into our bucket, the more your brain thinks, because it's a caveman brain, remember, that there is some kind of physical danger, some version of polar bear. And so it turns on that emergency setting. And so we react with anxiety, we react with anger, we react with not wanting to interact with people and just opt out of the world. So even if we don't know why that very last tiny thing was the thing that tipped us over the edge, that's how we respond. So it can be all of a sudden in response to a sudden shock, or it can be that subtle drip feed of everyday dross into our bucket. And every time we think about it, it goes in there again. So if you think about it once or you think about it 100 times, in it goes. So you can see how quickly that stress bucket can fill up. So is it any wonder that all of us, given what we've endured over the past year, the uncertainty, the doubt, the deprivation, the things that we've missed from seeing our friends and family, that so many more people have been struggling with anxiety or depression or overwhelm or a combination of all those? So that sounds utterly depressing, but fortunately, we do have a couple of answers. So we need a mechanism to empty that bucket, don't we? Fortunately for us, there is. And it's really integral to what I know you're going to be working on with this 30-day reset, because it's sleep. And I know a lot of you have been prioritizing and thinking about how that works into your month. And we all know intuitively that sleep is really good for us. We all know that we feel so much better after a good night's sleep. But this is why. Sleep, a special part of our sleep cycle called REM, rapid eye movement sleep, helps us empty the bucket. That's what happens. Now, all of you know this intuitively. So you know when you've had a really rough day and you come home and say to a friend or a partner, oh my gosh, that was so annoying. I had such a row with this person because they said that. And they might reassure you and say, oh, it's fine, it's okay, don't worry about it. But you're still really cross. So you might go to bed feeling really angry with that person. But then in the morning, even if you haven't completely forgotten about it, it doesn't sting quite as much. It's not quite as annoying. And that's because it's been dealt with overnight through that REM sleep. So what happens as your brain goes into REM, which it does at several points across the night, is that it replays every single one of those events. It might replay them clearly and you might reimagine it, or it might put it in one of those weird dreams that we all have. But it replays every single one. And once it decides that we don't need it, it deletes them out. So in an ideal world, we would get up in the morning and our buckets would look just like this one that I'm just deleting here, so that we can face the day with zero angst, no stress, no anxiety, no problems at all. But we don't, do we? And that's because, for various reasons, REM is only allowed to be 20% of our sleep. Because it's blooming hard work for your brain. Deleting stuff out is really hard work for your brain. It's actually having to physically remove the connections it made to store that information. So it takes a lot of effort. And as you get older, we need to be using our sleep time to repair things. Our children use their sleep to grow and develop, whereas as adults, we tend to use our sleep to clean things out, to replenish or to restock our energy stores. So we can only do 20% of our sleep as REM. So if you only get 6 hours a night, do the maths, ladies, it's not very much. So we wake up in the morning and we haven't got through very much of our bucket. And so it doesn't take much to trigger that overflow system again, does it? The other thing is that if your brain is really tenacious and is definitely dead set on emptying your bucket, it might try to overdo that REM. And I saw someone comment just now that when you need so much sleep but you still wake up feeling tired, that may be what's happening, because your brain's trying to go back into REM and overdo it. It's not being able to do that replenishing. For those of us that wake up in the middle of the night, maybe every 1.5 hours or so, that's because you've got to the end of a cycle. You've run out of REM and your brain is, sorry, I can't do anymore. And so we tend to wake up. And you know that's the case. And it's that that's woken you up and not the children or a dog or something outside, because you feel quite different. Something feels unfinished. Do you know what I mean? So there's a couple of things at work here. One, if you want to help with anxiety, you have got to get your sleep back on track, because giving your brain a chance to empty it is what it's designed to do, and it will happily do that for you, but you have to give it time and space to do that. We also have to put a lid over that bucket and not put so much in it. Hard as it sounds, we have to really work on not overthinking, not dwelling on stuff, but also not taking everybody else's stuff and putting that in our buckets too. So it's two really important things that we can do that will help with our bucket. But the other thing that I work with my clients on, because as Chloe said, anxiety is one of the things I work with quite a lot. Most things are made worse by anxiety, even if that's not directly what someone's come to see me for. So to really get a handle on anxiety and learn to deal with our buckets better, we have to use that intellectual top bit of our brain. Now, we have our cavemen ancestors to thank for this bit as well, because they developed a kind of reward system within their brains that rewarded them for doing things that kept them safe and well. So they got this reward and the levels went up when they did something cool, and then they went down again until they did something else. And so the levels tick on and on throughout the day. You find a mammoth, that's great. Get chased by a polar bear, not so good. Come back and you find a cave to sleep in. The levels go on and on. But if we can keep the levels of this chemical in our brain in that kind of parameter here, something like that, then everything feels okay, and we have access to this bit of our brain. Down here, we do not feel good. We don't have enough of this chemical reward. Whereas up here, oh, we are loving life. These are the best days when there is so much of it sloshing about in our brains that we feel amazing. And this stuff is serotonin. There are loads of other neurotransmitters, but the one that I talk about most, because most people have heard of it, it sounds familiar, is serotonin. It's your brain's reward for doing things that keep you mentally healthy and safe and well. So I know you don't need to hunt together. We have Asda and Waitrose and so on. We do have to act in a positive way. We are still, although we're not tribes people living in groups for safety in numbers, we do still have to interact with people in a positive way. And we get rewarded for doing that too. We have to think in a mentally healthy way, and think and create and express ourselves in a healthy way. And that all generates serotonin. So if we can keep that flow going, not only do we have access to that part of our brain, but we're also better able to cope with stress because we can come up with answers and solutions. We're better able to cope with pain, and we're better able just to cope with life, frankly. So keeping that flow of serotonin going is something that's really important. And we have to do it all the time. You can't just do one thing at the beginning of the week and expect to cruise the rest of it. You have to keep ticking along because it's a reward, remember. You don't just get one bit at the beginning, it wears off. So we have to do it repeatedly. So when I work with my clients, I really make them focus on the positives, which is not to say we pretend the bad stuff isn't happening. I absolutely know that stuff happens for everybody, me included. But if we were to talk about it in sessions, you know where that goes. If we talk about it and we say, oh, what a dreadful week I've had, you're just adding it into your bucket for my clients to then have to empty out later. So I trust them to deal with that. And what I focus on with them is thinking about the good stuff, the times they went out for a coffee with friends, the times that they watched their children's school play, the times they played football with their kids or they went for a run. So the times that they thought about how lucky we are to have a support of friends and family, all those things. And it sounds initially very superficial and very forced, but once you get into the habit of noticing, it gets much easier. Because don't forget, when we're in that primitive brain, remember how I told you how negative it was? It's always going to see the worst case scenario. So training yourself to see the best case scenario gets you out of here and back into here. So I can see a few questions popping in. So let me stop my screen share so I can have a quick look at the chat. So I saw something about running, which is absolutely crucial. Yes, it is indeed exactly what happens when we run. When we do physical exercise of all different sorts, running, jumping, dancing, running around the kitchen, whatever it is you do, that gives you a serotonin boost. There are also other neurotransmitters that get involved, like dopamine and oxytocin, but yeah, that's one of the big ones. So when we run and we do things that make us feel physically active, that's definitely a positive. And as Chloe said, this is why practicing that routine of noticing the little things that we can be mindful of and really appreciate is so crucial, because it keeps that flow of serotonin going, giving us access to the bit of our brain that is so much better at dealing with life. So that was quite a lot of information. So if anybody has any questions around that or wants to ask how it fits in with what you already know, then do please kind of unmute and shout.
Well, I was keen to ask, and I know Helen's posted a question in here as well, and it might relate, might be able to get it in with my question, but Helen said, how do you deal with this if it's learnt from parents and therefore feels normal? So if you've got learnt patterns of behaviour that feel natural, I know it's certainly mine. I feel like there's elements of my dad in me. Dad can be a bit battle faulty sometimes, so can I. I don't know how much of that is learned and how much of it is inbuilt in me, kind of thing. But I was going to also ask Claire, when you do your way of hypnotherapy, how does it work with that primitive brain and the evolved brain? When you do hypnotherapy with people, what parts are you, how does it work?
Oh, fantastic question. Okay, I'm going to go with the learnt pattern ones first and I'll come back to it, because yes, absolutely. Your brain wires in stuff that we do all the time. That's how we learn things. So there are very few things that we are really good at first time round. We have to practice them a few times. You don't remember anything first off. You have to do it a few times before your brain gets used to it. That's how we evolve habits. And the longer you've been doing that habit, the more hardwired it is. But your brain is always capable of change. That old, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. No, you can very much teach old people new tricks, even old in terms of once your brain is fixed at 20 odd. So yes, you can unlearn those habits. It takes effort and it takes repeated doing, but your brain is utterly ruthless in this. It's where it's really helpful. So whatever we do most is what your brain focuses on. So if you try really, really hard to move away from that habit, let's say biting your nails or smoking or something like that, if you try really hard not to do that by focusing on developing a new, healthier habit, your brain will unpick the old one because it's not being used anymore. And your brain is trying to be super efficient, and so it will unpick anything that's not being used so it can repurpose it for something else. So that's how we can change and get new habits. It takes a lot of effort, but it is entirely possible. So that's that bit. And then back to Chloe's question of what I'm actually doing in hypnotherapy. I could be here for the best part of the year if I was going to talk about that. But in very short terms, when you are in trance, and all of you, whether you've had formal hypnotherapy or not, have been in trance. If you drive, you're chugging on the motorway and you think, oh, that was my exit, that's in trance. If you've been watching a really good film at the cinema and you've missed everything going on around you, that's a form of trance too. So you can think of trance or hypnosis as being a form of very focused attention on something. So when you're working with me, for example, that would be akin to a guided visualization. There's a big crossover between what is visualization, meditation, hypnosis. They're all fairly similar. And what happens is that the way I explain it is that distracts your conscious brain, the bit that is going, I need to go to Tesco's, I need to put the MOT out, I need to get the shorts out of the dishwasher, whatever it is. All those little things that our brain is constantly thinking about, doing a visualization or being in trance with me distracts that bit of your brain so that you can actually hear what your subconscious is telling you, because your subconscious bit is the bit that's got the answers, the bit that knows what you need to do and how you're going to get there. So that's the part that we tend to work with in hypnosis. If you like, it's a bit like becoming aware of the sound that the birds are singing once you stop the lawnmower. You can hear something nicer once you stop all the busy going on. Does that help?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I loved it. I know when we were talking, you drew the diagram of the serotonin, the ups and downs. Yeah. And we were talking about the role of antidepressants or anxiety medication. And, with the amount that was going on in the summer, the doctor was like, oh, I think you should maybe try antidepressants. And I said, no, I don't want to go down that route or anything like that. But you actually said that they can actually be quite a positive, because I think for me, I remember saying to you, I look at them as a bad thing, like, oh, is it a sign of weakness for me that I can't cope? Or
no,
I can't.
Please
and you made me feel so much better about it had I decided to go down that route. If you could explain that.
I think of antidepressants as being like training wheels, if you like. So if I'm just going to share my screen again, because I like drawing, it's easier sometimes. So if we have this flow of serotonin that goes up and down like this, and if you're struggling, there's not a lot to be happy about. So, your serotonin might be a bit down here. It's a bit sad. If you have antidepressants, I'll draw it in a different color. What that means is that when you do something good, like here, and you have that little bit here, you've got your lowest point. When you do something good and your serotonin levels start to go up, what antidepressants do is stop them dropping down quite so quickly. So it sort of smooths out the ups and downs. So even though you've only done one little thing, you might just have done one thing here, your brain with the antidepressants can keep the serotonin hanging around for longer. It stops it being recycled. So I think of it as being like having training wheels on a bike. You know, you can wobble and fall off if you don't have them, but if you've got your training wheels, you might wobble, but you're not going to fall. You're learning to keep your balance. So you can think about antidepressants as taking that kind of job. So while you learn to focus on the positives and learn what you need to do to minimize some of the difficulties in your life, you know that you've got that little boost to your serotonin that will keep you on target. So that's why I really hate when people think of it as being a weakness. That if they've taken this life-changing medication, it's really supported them, and that's fantastic. But what that also means is once you've got your balance, once you've got really good about maintaining that flow of serotonin, that you can keep it going yourself in a pretty robust way, that you can take your training wheels off and you can learn to do without them once you've got all the support structures in place that you need. So antidepressants can be hugely, hugely helpful, but they don't have to be something that you're on for life. You can learn to manage that yourself. You may have to stop and start sometimes. And if you do that, service announcement, you always have to be careful and come off them very slowly. But it's entirely possible to do that. You're not stuck on them for the rest of your life and think that's it, it's going to be awful. No, I know GPs don't give you much help. You need to go and speak to your pharmacist. We're much better at that stuff.
Yeah, because I think that is part of the thing, isn't it? Because I know there's a lot of my clients who are struggling. So that's why I wanted to ask that question. And because I remember you saying that actually in having those training wheels and teaching the brain to sort of even itself out, it actually trains the brain to look for those little highs
absolutely.
and lows.
It's where you get that from. So once you get into the habit of building in what I call your happiness anchors, so it might be, for me, they are making sure I walk the dog, making sure I have, a cup of coffee, making sure I check in with my friends, making sure I do some kind of exercise. I know if any one of those things goes missing, I'm going to struggle with feeling on top of the world that week. So once you know what those are, then you may be able to do without them, but it's learning what those are and how they work for you. And yet they are your happy pills. And it's not something I'm going to say, oh, you should have to come off them. But what I would say is that because, we all know they have some side effects, you can, once you've got the hang of it, learn to do on your own. Because what some people do feel with antidepressants, and this is not necessarily aimed at you, Caroline, this is a generalization, is that because we don't feel those highs and lows of being up here with serotonin and lower days, you do tend to miss out on some of the excitement in life because you don't notice that change quite so much. So people do sometimes complain of feeling a bit numbed or bubble wrapped, so they don't get the highs and lows and the extent of those feelings.
I guess it's
for
a
a
bit
lot
like
of people, they're really helpful.
It's a bit like going to a theme park and instead of doing the over 18s ride, you do the spinning teacups or something. I guess it just doesn't give you that
so you don't get the real buzz. You never get terrified, but you don't get the same buzz. So that's the personality.
And I guess that comes down to where where people like you come in terms of empowering others to train the brain and to do those things, because we don't want to be on antidepressants or anxiety medication the rest of our life. And as Helen rightly said, unfortunately, the GPs, they put you on antidepressants and you tend to just stay on them, because we need the tools. You need a tool belt with all the things to then learn so that you can start taking the training wheels off. Nobody wants to be on training wheels for the rest of their life. It's really important to,
you don't get to do big hills on training wheels. You don't get to do cross country on training wheels. And yes, life is not meant to be perfectly happy all of the time. There will be things that are difficult, and I think we need to recognize that, because it's learning the lessons in those difficult, adverse times that gives you the resilience and the fortitude for when things are better. So I think there's a definite something to be said. It's not a case of we need to suffer to be human, but when we're finding things difficult, we often find strengths we didn't know that we had.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any other questions? Because this is obviously a very safe space. Claire's very knowledgeable on stuff. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask about their personal experience, or a family member or a friend, or anything that she drew about the brain? My son came in and he went, "Oh, that's so cute, and it's saying hi." I was like, "No, that's your brain, and that's the..."
Someone did say to me, it looks like a minion.
Yeah.
Just picking up on another question that Helen asked, is that why when you're stressed you don't retain information? Yes, absolutely. When you're feeling stressed, your bandwidth, if you like, your attention is so taken up with scanning for danger, and your primitive brain is that bottom bit. It's not attached to this top bit. So learning is so much harder, and remembering is so much harder, and multitasking is so much harder. So it's that downward spiral. We get stressed, we're in our negative brain, we can't cope, and you can't. It all unravels. What was that, Caroline? I saw a question about sleep there. Yes, and that's something else, isn't it? So your bed is your safe place. We know we're fine there. We know we're happy. We know we're comfortable. And in some ways, sleeping is really good for us. When you get to the point where it's too much sleep, that your brain is wearing itself out trying to empty your bucket, you're just digging around in your bucket the whole time, your brain doesn't have the time and space to do all its cleaning that it has to do. So, your brain is working super hard. And as a result of that, just like the rest of your body, it builds up waste from its metabolic processes. So that has to be cleaned out. We have to make sure that all the connections that we've made stay in the right places, because if they connect to the wrong things, we forget stuff that we might need. So often, too much sleep is not always helpful. So setting kind of a routine bedtime and wake time will probably help you get better quality sleep, even if it's slightly shorter in quantity.
Brilliant. Claire, question for you. What would you say for somebody who's battling that feeling of anxiety? I mean, I'd really love it if, so tomorrow when I send the email, if I can send your contact details, your website details, so that people can maybe reach out to you. I've got two questions. One is, if somebody came to you with anxiety and wanted to start taking control back over their mental health, I presume they can do things with you over Zoom? Does it have to be face-to-face?
Yeah, so I work online and I work over Zoom. Obviously, we've spoken over Zoom, so you know that. People are welcome to come to my cabin. That's where I am now. It's my little quiet space at the bottom of my garden, so that's nice and quiet and private. So I see people here. In terms of self-help stuff that I offer, I do a free initial consultation. So obviously what we've spoken about will be what I would explain to clients, but in personalising that for anyone's particular issues, we can always talk about that. And then I do a relaxation audio, because that trance element that I use in every session, I get people to practice in between sessions, because using trance is a sneaky way of emptying our bucket. It's like a little mini version of REM sleep that empties our bucket. And it helps to structure your sleep to make sure that you get the right amounts. It's always super relaxing. There's my Facebook lives, all that sort of thing. I do that on there too.
And how many sessions typically do you think it would take for somebody that's just feeling really anxious, just needs to get some good support and understanding how to do it themselves with the trance stuff? How many sessions?
Yeah, it's difficult to put a really precise figure on, because it changes depending on sort of what people have got going on around them that they need to get fixed. Because yes, I help them in sessions, but I'm only with them for an hour a week. The other 6 times 24 plus 23, they're on their own. So they have to do some of that work themselves. So in terms of how quickly they can make changes, that will have a bearing on it. But most people will start to see a difference in about 2 or 3 weeks. And I might work with people solidly for about 8 weeks, maybe less. And then every couple of weeks as kind of wean themselves off my training wheels as much as they do everything else.
Brilliant. And then just to sort of finish, really, what would be a couple of tips? So obviously we've got sleep. I found that really interesting, because I need to up mine by about an hour a night, and that would make a big difference. So yeah, sleep is a big one. That was really interesting. What are a couple of other things that we could all be doing to try and empty our buckets? Some really like good little tips that we can do day to day to help empty the bucket.
Okay, so your top tip, the only way you empty your bucket is through sleep. So that is absolutely non-negotiable. Get decent quality sleep. And quality sleep, I hate to break it to you ladies, but quality sleep is not the same as quantity. And if you rely on sleeping tablets or alcohol to sleep, that won't be good quality sleep, because that stops the amount of REM that you have. So please try not to rely on sleeping tablets or alcohol to get you to sleep. I know this is a health group, so most of you will be working really well on that. So good quality sleep, for sure. But putting a lid over your bucket is linked to how well you deal with things. So trying not to overthink stuff. Put it in the bucket, by all means. Stuff happens during the day and we have no control over what happens. What we do have control over is how many times we think about it and how we respond to it. So trying really consciously to not dwell on stuff, to try and distract yourself from doing that by focusing on those positives that I mentioned earlier. So building in time to do some exercise, because that's always going to be a mood booster, like Gemma said. But don't forget, exercise doesn't have to be a run. It can be your yoga class. It can be a kitchen rave. I'm all for a kitchen rave. It can be a dog walk. It can be anything that gets you moving about. So exercise will always help distract you from overthinking, because it's really hard to be miserable when you're having a kitchen rave. Try it. And then building in time with friends, those interactions are as well. So I call them my 3 Ps. They're the 3 positives. So positive actions, positive interactions, and those positive thoughts. So really trying to focus on building as many of those into your time as you can. That would be my big top tips.
Amazing. Brilliant. Oh,
and if you're really struggling, come and see me. I'm more than happy to have a chat about how hypnotherapy might work for you. And please don't think it's about mind control or voodoo. It's all very sciencey, and it's about teaching you how to control your mind. I have no desire to control anyone's mind. I've got enough of my own. So it's about helping you to manage how you cope with life, giving you back control over things, because that's huge. We need a bit of that.
Yeah. No, we're not all going to end up in a Paul McKenna spell where we start stroking our shoes like rabbits or anything like that.
No, do you know what? You can't, I can't, he can't make anyone do anything they don't really want to do, because we're not that gullible. There's a little part of all those people that he gets up on stage that are like, yeah, this will be a laugh. And so they're up for it. I'm not saying they're faking it, because they are genuinely entranced. Some people are very susceptible to things like that. But all of them had the capacity to want to do it in some way. So you have to give permission for that stuff. It's not anything I can make you. I've said to you before, if I could control minds, would I have to empty my own dishwasher or put my own bins out? No.
Your robots round.
Exactly.
Oh, no, that's been amazing, Claire. I can see everyone saying how useful it is, how great it's been. There's already people I want to send this to, people who aren't even in the group, but family members. I'm just like, you need to watch this. So
please do. The more people know about this, I'm really passionate about all of us understanding how our brains work. It's your control panel. For goodness sake, learn how this works, if nothing else. I don't mind if you don't know how your kidneys work, and your heart will be fine doing its thing. But if you don't know how your brain works, then you're going to really struggle, because you're missing out on the chance to fine tune it and get it working for you. So please share it with as many people as you can, whether it's little people, teenagers love this stuff, because it makes them realize that just because they're anxious, there's nothing wrong with them. Anxiety is completely normal. It's your brain going, oh, something you need to be aware of here. Have you noticed this? And so that's normal. So just giving people that is enough just to make a little bit of difference.
What is your website? Just if people want to
Inspired to Change.
Inspired to
all
Change.
One word. And it's the same on Facebook. There are lots of us, actually. We're now up to 20 associates. So you've got Inspired to Change people all over the place. And most of us work online. Most of us work in person. So pretty much wherever you are in the country, you're never very far from one of us. So inspiredtochange.biz, you'll find me.
Awesome. Claire, thank you so much for giving up tonight.
Thank you. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for all the awesome questions. It's been great.
I think people are going to really take so much from this, and hopefully they feel empowered as well, because it really struck a chord with me. So I think we should, when you all get this recording as well tomorrow, please do share it with people you care about and know that are struggling as well, because they should all be in touch with Claire and should all listen to this, and
Yeah.
So
Helen, you are super normal. We're as normal as normal as normal. There's nothing wrong with any of us. We're all fabulous.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, and well done everyone for coming on tonight.
Thank you so much for giving it the evening. It's lovely to chat to you. I'm always happy to talk brains, but thank you so much.
Thank you, darling. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.